So welcome back, hope you're all doing well. If you are new, welcome to my true crime channel where we discuss wrong-uns of all kinds from all over the world. And today's case takes place on Valentine's Day 2017, so very apt for this time of year. And it takes place in Scotts, which is a location in Kalamazoo County, Michigan. There lives a couple named Janel and Greg Boer, and Janel has just called the police saying that her husband has gone crazy. He's shot her and then, believing her to be fatally wounded, has gone on to shoot himself, and he is now dead. So the police race over there at top speed to find out what's happened. They live quite far out from the nearest densely populated area, so it takes a while to get there. But when they do, Janel is waiting outside for them, clutching her bloodied arm, where she says her husband shot her as he unsuccessfully tried to take her life. So the police go inside to find Janel's husband Greg, who is deceased from a gunshot wound to the head and laid on a mattress. It's clear something has gone on in this room because shots have been fired and fragments of the door are all over the floor where one of the bullets has hit it and took a large chunk out of it. Meanwhile, Janel is taken to Bronson Hospital for treatment to her injured arm. Now, the police want to know immediately what's gone on in that house whilst it's fresh in her mind, and so Janel agrees to have a police interview en route to the hospital. In the vehicle, she tells police that she and Greg were on the verge of divorce, and that's how an argument started. She says, "I'd just come home on my lunch break. I've been trying to beg him to not get divorced, and he's got really angry with me because I had told my attorney that my husband had been abusing my son and me, and he just started shooting a whole bunch." So police are ascertaining already that this is a couple who are in a very bad place in their relationship, and it looks like it's come to a very violent conclusion on this Valentine's Day. So Janel goes to hospital and is treated for the gunshot wound to her arm, and she's kept in hospital overnight. But the police are eager to get more information from her about this possible botched murder-suicide and how her husband has ended up shot dead inside their own house. So Janel, in her second police interview taken from her hospital bed, says that the two of them were in an argument about this impending divorce. She says she slapped him across the head with an open hand and then he just went crazy. He grabbed a gun and shot at her. They ask how many times did he shoot her, and she says, "I don't know, at least 2, maybe 3 times. She tells the police that the reason he'd lost his temper and attacked her was because she told Greg that she'd informed her attorney that Greg had been abusing their son and her, both mentally and physically. He was furious that she'd done this and told her, "I'm going to kill you for what you've done." Janel then says that it's at this point she managed to kick the gun he had pointed at her out of his hand so that it fell to the ground. But then Greg grabbed a second gun off the shelf and shot at her several times. She says, "Everything went black and I thought I had died." Then the police ask what happened next, and she says he put himself in the middle of the mattress, he held the gun to his head and shot himself. She says that Greg probably thought he'd been successful in killing her and so then decided to take his own life too. After this statement at Janel's hospital bed has been taken, Janel then does something quite odd. She asks for a hug from the detective. Of course, this detective is a professional man and immediately says, "Sorry, no, I can't hug you," and he leaves the room straight after. Meanwhile, back at the house, the police are taking photographs of the inside of the room where Greg was found dead. The room itself is known to the couple as the gun room. The room is, as you can assume, going from the name, full of guns, and there's also tons of ammunition in there, with Greg in the centre of it all, laid dead on the mattress on the floor. But who is this couple, and how did it get to the point where a man has apparently lost his mind, tried to kill his wife, and then killed himself? Well, Gregory Boer was born 19th of July 1981 to his parents Sharon and Greg Sr., and along with his younger brother Chad, they were what appeared to be a very close-knit family. I'm not aware if he had any other siblings. I've not seen any mentioned aside from Chad. And Greg was a much loved member of the family, a loving, caring and hard-working man. Greg, in his younger years, graduated from Comstock High School and then went on to work at M&M Motor Mall. Then he moved on to work for Morris Rose for 15 years, and after that he went to work at the pharmaceutical company Pfizer for a year. Greg was a mechanic at heart. He was the kind of person who was always tinkering around with motors and really anything that was mechanical. He was very interested in the workings of it. In his personal life, Greg married and became a dad in his early 20s. He then had a daughter who was his whole world, named Lily, and he actually ended up raising Lily as a single dad for 15 years. And Greg was a good father and incredibly close with his daughter, who it's said became the wonderful person she is because of her loving and attentive father. Then Greg met a lady named Janel who worked for the post office, and it got pretty intense pretty quickly. The pair fell head over heels for each other. They'd both been married once before, so they had that in common, as well as a love of guns. Guns and shooting was their mutual passion, and they loved to collect guns and get involved in target practice, with both of them becoming pretty good shots. And aside from their shared interest in guns, they also spent every minute they could get together. They were very much in that honeymoon period of a new relationship. It's said that the two were pretty much joined at the hip and very tactile, which actually got quite awkward sometimes for those who were in their company, a sort of three's a crowd kind of situation. Not long into their relationship, Janel is introduced to Greg's family, his brother Chad and his wife Natalie, and of course Lily, Greg's daughter. And they all kind of have the same reaction to her, that she seems to be very indifferent to meeting them or getting to know them. Janel is not overly interested in meeting them. Her focus is very much on Greg and Greg alone, but they figure, well, he's clearly happy, so if he's happy, they're happy. And things progress well for the couple. It's not long before the pair decide to elope in Las Vegas, and they have a child together named Jason. And the couple live a very comfortable life too. They both have good jobs, so they earn enough to purchase themselves a large house with a 12-acre plot of land to accompany it. And this is perfect for them because of their love for shooting and target practice. There's plenty of space there for them to shoot. They even dedicate one room in the house to all of their weapons, which they aptly name the gun room. So all is going okay with Greg, Janel, baby Jason and Lily all living together in the same house. But after Jason is born, things start to take a downward turn within the marriage. They stop getting on and things become very strained. Lily doesn't get on with Janel, and I'm sure that that likely has an impact on Janel and Greg's relationship too. Lily feels as though she's in the way as far as Janel is concerned. Janel pays her no attention and makes no effort to get to know her at all. And it's not just Lily who sees this. It seems like the rest of the family feel the same way. Janel is only interested in Greg and their son and no one else. So Greg, after 4 years of marriage, decides he's had enough. He believes that Janel is no longer the woman he married, and none of his family particularly like her either. Janel and Greg just don't get along anymore, so he files for divorce on the grounds of a breakdown of the marriage relationship. All Greg is interested in now is making sure he gets 50-50 custody of Jason and putting an end to this marriage so that they can all just move on. And he means business too, in terms of the pair splitting up, because he immediately grabs a spare mattress and takes it into the gun room. He sets up his own makeshift bedroom in there until a more suitable and permanent, separate living situation can be reached. And that's how it continues until Valentine's Day 2017, when Greg is found dead in the gun room on his makeshift bed, having seemingly taken his own life. So, back to the timeline, and Janel has given her second statement to detectives from her hospital bed, and police are looking around the gun room and taking photos of the scene as they find it. Janel has told the Kalamazoo County detective that she'd come home for lunch that day and the couple had argued, and as we know, several shots had been fired which all missed Janel, apart from one which had hit her in the arm. She's then told them that once the bullet hit her, she stumbled backwards and fallen, hitting her head and passing out. but oddly there's no wound on the back of her head. Medics and the police are both aware that if she'd really hurt herself enough to be knocked clean out, then there would be an injury of some sort to the back of her head, but there isn't. Police also note at the crime scene that there is no pool of blood from her arm where she was apparently laid unconscious after hitting her head, and this interests the detective on the case, so much so that he requests that the forensics team get inside that gun room to help work out whether this really was a botched murder-suicide or something else. Now, this forensics team have some very interesting equipment available to them which help them to examine the crime scene. The first fact they ascertain before examining the crime scene is a simple thing but a very important factor in this case, which is that Greg was right-handed. The second they look at this crime scene, they immediately see that Greg, who had apparently taken his own life with one of his own guns, had done so with his left hand. He must have, because the wound is on the left-hand side of his head, so it would have been pretty difficult for Greg to have used his dominant right hand to shoot the left-hand side of his head. Now, this is by no means conclusive proof that something isn't right here, but it's a very telling first indication that there's a chance that what happened that day didn't go down as Janel had told police. Janel, in her interview, had told police that he was holding the gun in his right hand as he was laid on the mattress. But in actual fact, he wasn't holding a gun at all. The gun was found on the floor a good few feet away from his body. If Greg shot himself, how did it move across the floor afterwards? Especially given that Janel said that it was in his right hand after he turned the gun on himself. Next, the forensics team look at the gunpowder residue left on Greg's face, and from that they're able to tell just how far away the gun was from his face when it was fired. It turns out that the gun was, by their approximations, 18 inches from his face when it was fired. Now, firing a gun with your right hand, as Janel said, into the left side of your head at an 18-inch distance is completely impossible. But even if he had used his left hand and she was wrong, getting an 18-inch distance from his face would be very difficult to do, if not impossible, and would also just make no sense whatsoever. Now, in terms of the gunshot residue on both Greg and Janel, there was some, but very little, on both of their hands. There was not enough on Greg's hands to show that he'd fired a gun, but there was also very little on Janel's hands too. But the difference here is that one of those people died after the shooting, and the other one was alive and alone long enough to get to a sink and wash her hands whilst waiting for the police to arrive. Janel clearly didn't think that police would look at Greg's hands too, because if he'd have fired several shots, there would be more than the tiniest trace of gunshot residue on his hands. So by washing her own hands and not thinking about what was on Greg's hands, she'd really set herself up for a fall there. And then there was the really questionable aspect to this crime scene. The fact that several shots were fired, allegedly by Greg, and all of those shots had missed Janel, with just one nicking her arm. Now, the reason that's strange is firstly because the gun room is a small room, and anyone stood in there would be, at the most, 2 feet apart. So anyone in a room that small would likely have a pretty good chance of hitting their target. Secondly, Greg, as we know, loved guns, and his hobby was target practice. Greg's family described Greg as an expert marksman, so in that small room, no more than 2 feet apart, would an expert marksman really fire a gun several times and each time miss their intended target? But even if that was, for some reason, possible, because stranger things have happened, what Janel hadn't banked on was the forensics team having some pretty useful equipment in their arsenal to check just exactly where those bullets flew that day. This piece of equipment allowed the police to conduct what's called bullet backtracking, which is exactly what it sounds like. Using this equipment, the police can use a laser to show the direction of the bullets fired to establish exactly where they came from and in what direction they went. They were able to look at the 2 key bullets fired that day, the one that killed Greg and the one that I mentioned earlier, which hit the door and sprayed a lot of shards back into the room. The bullet backtracking equipment is able to show police that the bullet which entered Greg's head and stayed there had a completely different flight path and angle to the angle it would have had if he'd shot himself. This laser proved that there was no way Greg fired that shot himself. The laser backtrack equipment also shows the flight path of the second bullet found in the room. This bullet had hit the door and as a result had damaged it, and shards of the door had fallen all over the room. Now perhaps this was one of the bullets that, according to Janel, Greg had fired at her, but the problem with that was that forensics found those shards of door all over Greg's body, precisely where he lay. And not only that, but those shards were resting on top of the blood on Greg's body from the gunshot wound. So this could only mean that that shot was made after Greg died, and that is major. The team, based on all of this, are able to come up with an alternative story to the one that Janel had told. The story was that on Valentine's Day, Janel had walked into the gun room where Greg was sleeping. She, without warning, shot Greg and then staged a crime scene, which she hoped would tell an alternative narrative to what actually happened. Then, to prove that Greg had shot her, she shot herself in the arm and called the police. But it isn't just excellent forensic work that starts to slowly unravel Janel's story. The detectives already have their own suspicions of Janel too. Greg's own family don't believe that Greg would ever try to kill someone or take his own life. And they also know that he's an expert shot, so even if he did try to shoot Janel, which they know he never would, but even if he did, there's no way he'd have missed. The family tell detectives this, and they also tell police how Janel was always a very distant and strange woman to them. And the police have already witnessed Janel's strange behaviour on several occasions in the short time they've known her. In the vehicle when they were taking her to hospital after the shooting, they noticed just how calm she was. She was able to answer all of their questions in a completely normal tone, even though apparently her own husband had just tried to kill her. And then, of course, there's the strange behaviour at the hospital when she asked for a hug from the detective. Those were clearly the actions of someone who was actively trying to garner sympathy from the detective and to almost form some sort of bond with him in the hopes that he would believe her story. And then the police find out even more about Janel from none other than her ex-husband. Janel's ex-husband tells police that whilst they were together, she'd had him arrested for assault, and the way that she did this was she hit herself so hard in the face that she actually damaged it to the point where it was outwardly very visible, and straight after that she called the police and successfully had him arrested for assault. Janel's ex said that he never touched her and explained what had happened, and it was clear to police at this stage that if she could do that, no one can know what else she's willing to do. The accusations Janel had made about Greg being abusive to her and her baby son could not be backed up at all. There was certainly no evidence, and there was no proof that Greg had ever been abusive in his life. So with all of this forensic evidence, and based on what they've heard from Greg's family and Janel's ex-husband, the police are very confident that they have a case here, and they bring Janel to the station for questioning. And Janel, as soon as she arrives, shuts down and refuses to speak to police without her lawyer present. But the most interesting thing here is the lawyer that she's appointed is a criminal lawyer. Before the police had even brought her in, she'd appointed a criminal lawyer, which, as the apparent victim of a botched murder-suicide, is quite a strange thing to do. The police tell her that they find it very strange that she has a criminal lawyer appointed, but she just says that she didn't realise that that's the kind of lawyer he was, and he just happened to be referred to her by someone else. The police also tell her that the forensic evidence they've gathered tells a very different story to the one she's told them previously, and from here on out she is officially a suspect. Then Janel, out of nowhere, starts to act very strange, saying she'd love to help them and answer any questions they have, but she's feeling very ill all of a sudden. She starts to say things like, "I wonder if I actually am dead, and that Greg did kill me that night." But then not long after that, she snaps out of it and lets police know that she intends on ordering a pizza for dinner. But Janel doesn't get the opportunity to do so because shortly after she's arrested on charges of murder and felony firearm use, which carries a potential life sentence. In court, all of the evidence is put forward, and it's stated that police believe that Janel carried out this killing because Greg wanted joint custody of their son Jason, and she didn't want him to have it. So instead, on Valentine's Day, she crept into the gun room whilst Greg was asleep, shot him, and then tried to ruin his good reputation in death by accusing him of abuse. But Janel's lawyer says that she is a fine woman who is a good employee, which to me sounds like someone really grasping at straws if their only good character reference is from their employer. Interestingly, I don't know if you noticed this earlier on, but Janel worked for the Postal Service, so that's yet another postal worker involved in a killing. My video from a few weeks ago, which I'll link above and below, was about Jennifer San Marco, a postal worker who was just one of a number of postal workers who went on to kill. And it's actually pure coincidence that I happened to pick this case, which involves another postal worker involved in a shooting. But before this case can proceed any further, in a shock move, Janel agrees to plead guilty. But of course, there's something in it for her. It's a plea deal. This plea deal involves Janel pleading guilty to second-degree murder. In exchange for her guilty plea, life imprisonment will be taken off the table, plus her firearms conviction. This will mean a lower sentence for Janel and the opportunity for closure for Greg's family. Greg's family don't want Janel to receive a reduced sentence, but they also know that a full trial will take a long time and they just want this over. They want that woman behind bars so that they can finally try to begin to put the pieces of their lives back together. And so, on the 11th of January 2018, Janel, now aged 44, pleads guilty to second-degree murder, and Greg's family are given the opportunity to read impact statements in front of Janel. Greg's mother says, "You had no right to kill my son. He did nothing but believe you, taking you in and loving you. I can only hope that where you're going you get all the attention you crave and more." Greg's brother Chad says her actions have shattered the family and stole a good father from his children. He says to Janel, "I hope you rot." Greg's dad says he hopes Janel feels the pain and sorrow his family feels every day. And you can see the absolute anguish in Greg's family during these statements. It's really heartbreaking to watch. Janel then goes on to receive a sentence of 17 to 19 years in prison for the murder of her husband. Janel turns to the judge, not Greg's family, and apologises for taking Greg's life. In sentencing, the judge says that what Janel did was reprehensible and brutal. It was a senseless and selfish act. And then Janel is taken away to commence her sentence behind bars. Greg's family were absolutely devastated by what Janel did. Greg's mother Sharon said, "Nothing will ever bring my son back. Nothing will ever erase the anguish we're all feeling from the loss of my son." She said that in making the impact statement, she wanted Janel to know that she's a monster. And she wanted everyone else to know that Greg was never abusive in his life. Because during this ordeal, some people actually believed that he was guilty of abusing Janel, solely based on her false accusations. And of course, Greg's daughter Lily lost her beloved dad. She said he was a good man and a big part of their family is now missing. Janel's defence said that they didn't believe that Janel is evil. They said that she struggled a lot about what she did and why she did it, and she is now well aware and regretful that she took her own son's father from him, and if she truly thought about the consequences of her actions, she would never have gone through with them. And it is her son, Jason, who will suffer terribly knowing what his mother did. And he does know. He was told by his therapist what happened to his parents. And for a very young child to process something like that is so utterly devastating for a child and for everyone else involved. Jason was in the end adopted by Greg's brother Chad and his wife Natalie, who will now raise this little boy and I'm sure try to keep the memories of his dad alive as much as possible. Jason will be 22 years old when his mother Janel is released from prison. Greg's family said that Greg was a loving and dedicated father, a hard-working, compassionate man who helped everyone who needed him. They said he was a good friend, a good neighbour and a good son, and I have no doubt that he is still very sorely missed. And that's it. I hope you found this case interesting. If you did, please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. My social media handles are down below in the description box if you'd like to follow me over on there too. Have a great day, stay safe, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.